Lena Hart knew exactly when Julian Mercer had stopped loving her, because she could name the object that had replaced her. It was not another woman at first. It was a mirror. Every room they entered became a stage for his reflection in other people's eyes, and every year of their marriage, he seemed to need more witnesses and less truth. By the time he asked for the divorce, he had already learned how to speak about their ending as if it were a brand correction. Clean. Necessary. Mature. He said those words in the study of the townhouse they had renovated together, standing beneath shelves Lena had sanded herself while he took calls about expansion deals and magazine profiles. 3 months later he was getting married again under a ceiling she had once traced with her fingertips while promising her grandmother she would save the old estate from developers who wanted to strip it into luxury suites and call that preservation. Ashbourne Hall stood at the edge of the water with all the cold grace of a woman who had outlived every insult. Even in late afternoon, with black cars crowding the drive and white roses wired around the stone balustrades, the house looked older than the people trying to turn it into a performance. The sea beyond the lawn moved in dull silver bands. Wind worried the silk ribbons tied to the chairs on the terrace. Somewhere inside, a string quartet was tuning. The notes rose and fell like someone trying not to cry in public. Lena stepped out of her car and stood for a second with one hand on the door, steadying herself against a rush of memory so sudden it felt physical. The last time she had come here with Julian, they had still been married. He had walked through the great hall talking over her shoulder to a potential investor, telling him the estate would be transformed into a flagship event property with heritage distinction and modern revenue channels. Lena had been the one with the conservation plans spread across the library table. Lena had been the one who knew which stair rail had to be reinforced by hand because the original oak would split under the wrong pressure. Lena had been the one who understood that the West Conservatory glass came from a now-defunct workshop and could not simply be replaced from a catalogue. Julian had smiled at everyone and introduced her as his wife, the one with a sentimental attachment to old houses. Now she was his ex-wife, and he was marrying Isabel Lennox in the orangery at sunset. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier in thick cream stock edged in pale gold, as if elegance could disguise cruelty. Lena had not answered. Then, that morning, Bennett had called. He had been venue manager at Ashbourne Hall longer than Julian had known how to knot a tie, and his voice carried the same grave courtesy it always had. "Miss Hart," he had said, "I think it would be best if you came in person." He had not explained more over the phone. He had not needed to. Bennett never called without reason, and Lena had learned the hard way that men who preferred ambiguity usually benefited from it. So she came. A pair of young attendants at the front steps glanced at her, then at the guest list tablet, then back at her simple navy dress and low heels, with the quick uncertainty of people who sensed someone mattered but did not know how. Lena gave her name. One of them blinked. "The groom asked that any unlisted arrivals be directed to the side entrance," she said. Of course he did, Lena thought. Before she could answer, Bennett appeared from the doorway. He was tall, silver-haired, and formal in the old way, the kind that made everyone else suddenly seem underdressed in character if not in clothing. He came down the steps himself. "Miss Hart," he said, and there was no hesitation in the title. "Thank you for coming." The attendant stepped back so quickly she nearly lost hold of the tablet. Bennett's gaze moved over Lena's face with discreet concern. "You look very like your grandmother when you are deciding not to show how angry you are." The remark startled a brief laugh out of her. "I didn't know it was that obvious." "Only to people who knew her." He lowered his voice. "We should speak in the morning room before the ceremony begins." Julian must have seen them through one of the entry windows, because a moment later he came out onto the landing above the steps. He had always known how to occupy a staircase. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the first car Lena had driven in law school. His hair was cut closer than when they were married. He had the sharpened look of a man in love with his own reinvention. For one suspended second his expression cracked. Surprise first. Then annoyance. Then that flat, practiced composure she remembered from depositions, fundraisers, and the day he had told her he did not think their marriage had room left for growth. "Lena," he called, coming down with an ease that looked natural if you had never watched him rehearse charm in a mirror. "I didn't expect you." "No," she said. "That makes two of us." His jaw tightened at the tone. The attendant suddenly found the flower urns fascinating. Bennett remained motionless beside her. Julian stopped one step below her, as if refusing to look up. The gesture would have been subtle to anyone else. To Lena, it was familiar. He always tried to place conversations on terrain that made him feel taller. "If you're here because of the invitation," he said, "it was sent out broadly. Isabel and I agreed it was healthier to treat this with maturity rather than weird secrecy." "Healthier," Lena repeated. "That's generous." He ignored that. "Today isn't the right day for complications." "Then you should have built a life that didn't depend on them," she said. The old instinct to soften flashed through her and vanished. She noticed his boutonniere before she noticed his discomfort. White rose. Her rose. The climbing variety from the south wall cut too early, one of the blooms she had paid to bring back from a nursery in Sussex after the original rootstock nearly failed. Julian wore it like he had always belonged here. He saw her look at it and misunderstood, or pretended to. "Isabel chose the florals. You don't need to read meaning into everything." "No," Lena said quietly. "I usually don't. That's why people like you get away with so much." For the first time, something like real irritation entered his face. He leaned in slightly. "I asked Bennett to keep things smooth today. Whatever you think this is, don't make a scene." Lena looked at him, then at Bennett, then back at Julian. "I haven't made a scene in years," she said. "That's why you mistook silence for surrender." Behind him, from somewhere in the great hall, a woman laughed too brightly. Isabel. Lena had met her twice before the divorce became public and once after, at a gallery fundraiser where Isabel had clasped Lena's hands and said, with polished pity, that reinvention could be beautiful if you let go of bitterness. Lena had gone home that night and thrown away the champagne flute she'd carried all evening without drinking from. Now Isabel's laughter moved closer. Bennett cleared his throat. "Miss Hart and I have estate business to discuss." Julian's eyes flicked toward him. "Estate business?" "Yes, sir," Bennett said. There was something in Bennett's tone that made Julian pause, but only for a second. Then the mask returned. "Whatever this is can wait until tomorrow." "No," Bennett said. "It cannot." The wind lifted the ribbons again. A gull cried over the water. Inside, the quartet found the first clean line of a hem arranged into something fashionable and thin. Julian looked from one of them to the other. Lena saw the beginning of unease then, a small dark opening in his confidence. Good, she thought, not because she wanted revenge in the ugly sense, but because for once reality had arrived before his speech did. The morning room still smelled faintly of beeswax and the cedar boxes Lena's grandmother had stored letters in. Nothing in Ashbourne Hall ever forgot itself entirely. Even when event planners covered the mantels with imported candles and draped the windows in rented silk, the bones of the house held. The walls carried old weather. The floorboards kept the memory of footsteps. A person could leave. A marriage could end. Money could change hands. But some places waited to see who had mistaken stewardship for possession. Bennett closed the door and set a leather folio on the low table between the sofas. Lena remained standing for a moment, taking in the room she had once imagined restoring as a reading parlor. The long window faced the bay. Her grandmother had liked to sit there at 4 in the afternoon with tea and an apple knife, peeling fruit in one unbroken ribbon while discussing things most people avoided. Contracts. Inheritance. Character. She had believed all three revealed themselves under pressure. Bennett opened the folio. "These arrived from Carter and Vale at 11:30. I asked them to email copies and send the originals by courier. Given the timing, I thought it wiser not to put anything in the general office." Lena sat. Carter and Vale had handled the Hart Trust for decades. She took the first document. The paper was thick, the seal cleanly pressed. By the second page she understood why Bennett had called. Her grandmother's transfer directive, held in probate until the conclusion of Lena's marriage or her 35th birthday, whichever came first, had become fully effective at 9:14 that morning. Lena had turned 35 3 months after the divorce was finalized. The remaining review period had closed. Ashbourne Hall, along with the operational authority attached to the estate management company, now passed into her direct control. She read the page twice, then a third time, though the words did not change. Julian booked his wedding here using Mercer Events Holdings, Bennett said carefully. He represented himself as acting through an anticipated strategic partnership with the estate. The deposit cleared because it came through the public events account, but the premium access, exclusivity rights, west lawn alterations, and after-hours extensions required owner authorization. Those were attached to a draft term sheet never executed. Lena looked up. He assumed I would sign. Bennett did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. A short, disbelieving sound escaped her. It had been one of Julian's defining talents, mistaking what he wanted for what had already been agreed. During the marriage it had appeared as optimism to people who liked expensive confidence. Up close it looked more like entitlement wearing a watch. Why now? She asked. Why wasn't I notified the moment the transfer closed? Mr. Vale tried. He was told by Mr. Mercer that you were away and that any administrative notices should be routed through his office, pending a private settlement of marital property. Bennett's expression hardened in a way Lena rarely saw. I took the liberty of confirming that with the firm myself after the fireworks contractor requested access to the cliff path this morning. Fireworks, Lena said. Yes. Without marine clearance. Also without your signature. Lena set the papers down. For a moment she saw the whole shape of it with painful clarity. Julian had used the speed of the divorce the way he used everything else, as leverage. He had counted on Lena being too exhausted to challenge details while he spoke about dignity and closure. He had assumed the estate would either remain in trust long enough for him to stage the wedding or that the transfer, if it happened, could be managed through charm, pressure, or a document placed in front of her at the last minute. He had always believed timing could replace honesty. Bennett slid another sheet across to her. Vendor notes. There are also discrepancies involving payment schedules. Several invoices were pushed to post-event settlement. That is not standard practice here. Because they thought the publicity would cover the risk, Lena said. Or because Mr. Mercer indicated there would be investors in attendance. Of course there would be. Julian never did anything without an audience that might convert into capital. Lena leaned back and closed her eyes for a second. The room did what old rooms do when someone is trying not to break inside them. It held its silence properly. 3 months earlier, when Julian had proposed the divorce as if suggesting a better portfolio allocation, he had done it with his usual polished exhaustion. We are no longer aligned, he had said. Lena had stared at him across the dining table where the candle wax had dripped onto linen during the last dinner party they hosted before they stopped pretending things were normal. He had already moved his cufflinks to the guest room by then. He had already started answering messages with his screen turned away from her. Isabel's name had surfaced gradually in the social pages first, then in his vocabulary, then in their kitchen. She was strategic. She was fresh energy. She understood visibility. Julian spoke about her the way men speak about women they want everyone to approve of before they admit what they have already done. Lena had not screamed. She had not thrown a glass. She had asked whether there was someone else, and he had said, not in the way you're trying to make it sound, which was confession enough. The divorce itself had gone quickly because Lena wanted out of the performance before it consumed whatever remained of her dignity. She kept the small apartment in town, her own consulting work, and a few family pieces Julian had never noticed enough to fight over. He kept the townhouse, 2 cars, and the impression among their friends that the separation had been heartbreakingly mutual. The only thing he never truly understood was that Ashbourne Hall had never been his to imagine himself out of. Her grandmother had trusted Lena with the estate because she knew how Lena loved things. Not publicly. Not greedily. Not for leverage. Carefully. With patience. With the kind of devotion that notices stress fractures in silence and fixes them before collapse makes a spectacle. Bennett watched her over folded hands. What would you like to do? The simplest answer would have been cancel the wedding. She had legal grounds already: unauthorized changes, incomplete approvals, vendor exposure, safety breaches. She could end the entire thing before the first guest took a seat. She pictured the chaos, the whispers, the mortification on Isabel's face, the fracture in Julian's control. Part of her, the bruised part, wanted exactly that. But another part of her, older and colder, knew that humiliation alone was a weak instrument. Julian had survived social embarrassment before. He could talk around shame. He could rename disaster and sell it back as resilience. No, if this was going to matter, it had to be reality he could not out-talk. Is Mr. Mercer aware of the transfer? She asked. Not yet. Lena looked toward the window. On the lawn below, staff in black moved between rows of chairs. Someone was adjusting lanterns along the gravel path. Beyond them the sea remained indifferent and silver. Then let him proceed, she said. For now. Bennett was silent a beat. You are certain? No, Lena said. I'm clear. There is a difference. And Miss Lennox? Lena thought of Isabel's bright pity, her glossy certainty, her talent for making cruelty sound like good manners. Was she a thief, a fool, or a willing passenger on Julian's ambition? Lena suspected all three in different proportions depending on the day. If she has built her future on his version of things, Lena said, then she deserves to meet the truth before sunset. Bennett inclined his head. Very good. He reached into his pocket then and set something on the table. A ring of old iron keys bound by a leather strap, heavy enough to leave a mark on polished wood. When the time is right, he said, these should come from me to you publicly. Lena stared at them. The keys to Ashbourne Hall. Front doors. Archive room. Wine cellar. Chapel. The rooms no event guest ever saw. Her throat tightened without warning. Julian had once told her she was too attached to symbols. He had never understood that symbols only matter when they are attached to power. By 5 o'clock the house had become a theater of controlled urgency. Florists rushed trailing scent and ribbon through the corridor. A catering assistant cried quietly in the pantry because the champagne count was off and no one wanted to tell the bride. A violinist stood alone in the west passage rerosening her bow while reading messages from someone named Daniel with the tense half-smile of a person trying not to bring one life into another. On the terrace, guests were beginning to arrive in that expensive, delayed way particular to people who think lateness is evidence of importance. Lena moved through the service side of the house with Bennett, signed 3 documents in the office, and listened while he outlined the event exposures with the calm precision of a man who had managed both aristocrats and influencers and respected neither category more than fire code. Julian's team had ordered candle installations too near original woodwork, requested access to the old chapel despite restoration restrictions, and scheduled an after-party in the Cliff Pavilion without weather contingency. There were also unpaid balances disguised under a sponsorship package Mercer Events had promised to settle after a forthcoming announcement. Announcement of what? Lena asked. Bennett's mouth tightened. A hospitality acquisition fund, from what I gather. Mr. Mercer has been speaking rather freely in the bar. Lena almost smiled. Of course he had. Julian never separated romance from rollout. A proposal, a launch, a profile piece, a wedding, to him they were all stages for a future headline. She should have left then. Her documents were signed. Her authority was established. Bennett could have handled the rest with lawyers and security if needed. But the house kept handing her small proofs that this spectacle had been built with pieces of her life, and every proof made departure feel less like dignity and more like erasure. The escort cards in the anteroom were lettered in the same hand she had commissioned for the estate archive catalog. The rosemary woven into the napkin knots came from the kitchen garden she had planted with her grandmother after the first retaining wall was repaired. The ceremony chairs had been placed beneath the south terrace windows so the photographs would catch sunset on old glass, precisely where Lena's restoration notes had recommended late-season events be staged. Even the signature cocktail was called the tidal vow. Lena had written that phrase in a margin 2 years earlier while sketching branding possibilities for heritage wedding packages, back when Julian still asked to see her ideas and then introduced them later as things that had come to him during a run. She stood near the orangery doors looking at the place cards when Isabel's reflection appeared in the glass before the woman herself entered. "I thought I saw you," Isabel said. She wore a silk robe the color of pale champagne, her dark hair set in glossed waves pinned away from her face while a makeup artist fluttered behind with brushes. Up close, Isabel was even more beautiful than Lena remembered, but it was the engineered kind of beauty built for photographs from the left. She had a mouth trained to smile before she meant it. Lena turned. "Congratulations." Isabel gave a soft laugh, as if they were two civilized women navigating an awkward charity table. "Thank you. That sounds almost sincere." "It is sincere," Lena said. "I do hope the day is memorable." Isabel studied her. There had always been a small flare of competitiveness in Isabel's gaze, not because she loved Julian that deeply, Lena suspected, but because she liked being chosen in rooms where choice carried audience value. "When Julian told me you might come," Isabel said, "I said we should let you. Closure is healthier than avoidance." Lena looked at her for a moment. "You really do enjoy using therapeutic language as a weapon." Something flickered in Isabel's expression, surprise perhaps, then amusement. "I can see why he found you exhausting at the end." "No," Lena said. "You can see why he needed someone who mistook rehearsed honesty for character." The makeup artist froze. Isabel's smile thinned. For a second the room lost its perfume and became what it truly was, a narrow ledge between civility and exposure. "You don't have to stay," Isabel said. "Whatever story you've told yourself, this isn't about you anymore." Lena let that settle. The easiest cruelties are the ones people borrow from the last person who used them well. Julian had once told her the same thing in different words. "You're right," Lena said at last. "It isn't." Isabel seemed oddly dissatisfied by the lack of fight. She glanced toward the cards on the table. Those calligraphy samples were a nightmare to source, by the way. Apparently the original artist only works by referral. "I know," Lena said. "I referred her." The silence that followed was small but exact. Isabel's eyes narrowed, not because she understood yet, but because she felt the shape of not understanding. From deeper in the corridor came the click of expensive shoes. Julian. He entered with the bright, brisk energy of a man already late for his own praise. "There you are," he said to Isabel, then noticed the air between them. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly," Isabel said. Julian looked at Lena. "I thought Bennett had settled whatever administrative thing this was." "He has," Lena said. "Good. Then maybe go home." Isabel touched Julian's sleeve, lightly but possessively. "Don't be unkind." Lena came. "That's brave." Lena almost pitied her then. Not for loving the wrong man. Adults survived that every day. She pitied her for still believing that meanness delivered in cashmere became sophistication. Julian lowered his voice. "I mean it. Don't linger. The guests are arriving." "That's usually how weddings work," Lena said. He drew a breath through his nose, the small signal of anger he hated showing. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Whatever performance this is." Lena met his eyes. "Julian, if I had wanted a performance, I would have chosen a better audience." A flush rose under his collar. Isabel glanced between them, and for the first time Lena saw not triumph but a question. Perhaps Isabel had imagined Lena heartbroken and dramatic. Perhaps she had expected tears, accusation, visible need. Calm unnerved people who had prepared for pleading. A bridesmaid appeared in the doorway then, pink-faced and breathless. "ISA, the planner says the marine lantern permit still hasn't come through, and the band wants confirmation about the pavilion setup because the cliff wind." "Not now," Isabel snapped. Julian turned to the bridesmaid with immediate irritation. "Handle it." She looked as if she might cry. Lena recognized the type of event, beautiful from the lawn, unstable in the wiring. Bennett arrived before anyone could say more. His presence shifted the room by simple virtue of steadiness. "Mr. Mercer, Miss Lennox," he said, "the photographer is ready for pre-ceremony portraits. Also, there is a question regarding the West Terrace access and the after-party extension." Julian gave a dismissive wave. "My office sent over everything." "Not everything, sir," Bennett said. Julian's expression sharpened. "Then send it to me and I'll approve it." A tiny, almost invisible pause. Bennett's eyes moved to Lena and back. "It does not require your approval," he said. The room went still. Not dramatically. More dangerously than that. Like glass deciding whether to crack. Julian stared at him. "What does that mean?" Bennett inclined his head. "It means we will discuss it at the appropriate moment." Isabel frowned. "Appropriate moment for what?" Lena said nothing. The leather strap of the key ring seemed to press phantom weight into her palm, though it was still in Bennett's pocket. Julian laughed once, too shortly. "Fine. Later. Whatever this is, not now." He steered Isabel from the room with a hand at the back of her waist. Isabel looked over her shoulder once before disappearing down the corridor. It was not a victorious look anymore. It was wary. Bennett waited until they were out of hearing range. "The registrar has arrived. So have two of the investors Mr. Mercer has been courting." One of them asked whether the estate partnership announcement would precede the vows. Lena closed her eyes briefly. "He sold the illusion already." "It appears so." She opened them again and felt the strange stillness that sometimes comes before the exact moment a life changes shape. Not the loud moment. The quiet one before it, when all the pieces are already moving toward collision. "Then we should not keep anyone waiting," she said. The ceremony was scheduled for 6:30, the dinner for 8, and the unveiling of Julian's newest self apparently whenever a camera was present. Lena did not take a guest seat. She stood in the side arcade where ivy climbed along old stone and the terrace steps offered a view of both the aisle and the sea. From there she could see nearly everything without being seen by everyone. It was a position she had occupied too many times in her marriage, near enough to witness, far enough to be excluded from authorship. Guests settled in a rustling wash of linen, silk, and controlled appraisal. Lena recognized several of them from the years she had spent beside Julian at dinners where everyone smiled as if friendship were a merger. There were fund managers, real estate developers, 2 magazine editors, a restaurateur who collected monasteries and converted them into boutique resorts, and one elderly baroness who had once told Lena she had the hands of a woman who had not given up. At the time Lena had thought it a strange compliment. Now it felt almost prophetic. A pair of women in sculptural hats glanced toward Lena and then bent their heads together. She did not need to hear them. She knew the shape of such conversations. "Is that the ex-wife? How modern of them. How awkward for her. How composed she looks. I would never have come. I suppose some women need closure. Or perhaps she wants him back." People loved inventing humiliations for women who refused to perform them. The quartet began. Guests rose. Julian took his place beneath an arrangement of white garden roses and winter greenery. He looked outward with that handsome solemnity men borrow when they want to appear moved by consequences they have personally created. Lena watched him smooth his cuffs, glance once toward the photographer, then lift his chin in readiness. If she had not loved him once, she might have admired the discipline. Then Isabel appeared at the top of the terrace steps on her father's arm, and a murmur moved through the rows. Her gown was exquisite. Ivory silk, square neckline, long veil scattering light like frost. She looked radiant in the narrow social sense of the word, which usually meant expensive enough to convince strangers happiness had already happened. For a moment even Lena felt the ache of contrast. There had been a time she thought her own wedding photographs held promise like that. It turned out pictures mostly captured the lighting around delusion. The officiant began. The sea moved. Glass lanterns knocked softly in the breeze. Lena tried to listen and failed. Not because she was in pain, though she was. Not because Julian was marrying someone else, though the speed of it still had a bruise-colored vulgarity. She failed because everywhere she looked, the house kept speaking to her in the language of ownership and memory. The flagstones of the aisle had been relayed under her supervision after winter salt ate through the old mortar. The terrace sconces had been rewired using the electrician her grandmother trusted. The antique brass urns at the entrance had once held hydrangeas from the heart-cutting garden until Julian suggested lilies would read richer in photos. Even the music floating over the bay had been chosen from a list Lena compiled for heritage events, because recorded sound died strangely against the south wall and certain strings warmed the stone. He had built his new beginning out of her notes. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Isabel's father answered in a voice meant to sound proud and nearly broke on the last word. Lena wondered whether anyone ever truly gave a woman away anymore, or whether they simply handed her toward the version of the future she had been taught to mistake for safety. Julian reached for Isabel's hands. The photographer shifted left. The sea brightened under a break in the cloud. That was when Bennett entered the terrace from the central doors carrying the ring of keys in one hand and a dark folder in the other. At first only Lena noticed. Then one of the planners did. Then the officiant faltered mid-sentence because Bennett had crossed too far into the line of sight to ignore. The string quartet stumbled, recovered, and stopped altogether. Julian turned, irritation already forming. Bennett, not now. Bennett did not hurry. That was the most devastating thing about him. He approached with the grave composure of a man delivering tea to a library, and because he did, the entire interruption became impossible to dismiss as panic. "I'm afraid it must be now, sir," he said. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Isabel stared. The officiant stepped back. Somewhere near the second row a man whispered, "Is this part of it?" Julian's face transformed with alarming speed from annoyance to fury held barely behind his teeth. "We are in the middle of a ceremony." "Yes," Bennett said. "And the estate is in the middle of a transfer of authority already concluded as of this morning." The wind caught the edge of Isabel's veil. Lena could hear every small sound suddenly, glass ticking, fabric shifting, a gull calling far off over water. "What authority?" Isabel asked. Bennett turned, not to her, but to Lena where she stood in the side arcade. "Miss Hart," he said clearly, "if you would come forward." Every head on the terrace pivoted. For 1 second the old instinct returned, stay back, reduce the scene, make yourself smaller so everyone else can remain comfortable. Then Lena looked at Julian. He had spent years depending on that instinct. So had half the room. She walked forward. Her heels sounded against stone with a calm she did not feel until she heard it. Down the arcade, across the terrace edge, along the front row where perfumes and curiosity parted around her. She stopped 3 feet from Julian and Isabel. The photographer lowered his camera. One of the bridesmaids actually covered her mouth. Bennett held out the key ring. "By order of the Hart Estate trustees and effective upon completion of the transfer recorded this morning, Ashbourne Hall and its operational authority are hereby placed under the direct stewardship of Miss Lena Hart." The keys landed in her palm with blunt, beautiful weight. For a second nobody moved. The silence had edges now. Then someone in the back row said softly, "My God." Julian looked as if the world had insulted him by failing to follow his notes. "That's absurd." "No," Lena said. "It isn't." Isabel turned sharply to him. "Julian." He did not look at her. "This is a timing technicality." Bennett, whatever probate nonsense you've decided to dramatize. It is not probate nonsense, Bennett said. It is lawful transfer. Additionally, several elements of today's event were scheduled without owner authorization, including restricted access zones, unpaid premium usage, and a marine fireworks request that would place the estate in direct violation of safety conditions. Lena did not raise her voice. Mr. Mercer booked this wedding under assumptions he was not entitled to make. You are not canceling my wedding in the middle of it, Isabel said, her poise cracking on the word my. Lena turned to her. I haven't cancelled anything. Yet. A nervous laugh, immediately silenced, came from somewhere among the guests. Julian stepped toward Lena. Whatever game you think you're playing. This isn't a game, she said. That's your specialty. His face changed. Not the public face. The private one. The one she had seen in kitchens after failed deals and in cars after dinners where someone else got more attention. Rage, yes, but beneath it something worse for men like Julian, disbelief that the woman they discounted had become the center of the room without asking permission. You signed the settlement, he said quietly. I signed the divorce, Lena said. I did not sign away my family. The Baroness in the third row murmured, well, at exactly the wrong volume to be private. Isabel looked from Lena to Bennett to Julian and back again. Her eyes were sharp now, calculating in a way Lena almost respected. Did you know about this? Julian did not answer quickly enough. And there it was. Not proof of betrayal in a legal sense. Something more intimate and therefore more lethal in public, delay. Bennett opened the dark folder. There are also outstanding questions about use of the estate name in connection with a forthcoming investment announcement. Given the lack of executed partnership documents, those representations may require immediate correction before any further proceedings take place on the property. One of the investors in the second row sat forward. What investment announcement? Julian turned toward the seats, smile straining into place like a cracked hinge. Everyone, please, this is an internal administrative matter. We'll take 5 minutes. Lena closed her fingers around the keys. No, she said. We won't. The thing about a public lie is that it does not collapse all at once. First it loses rhythm. Then it loses allies. Then it starts requiring too much explanation, and explanation is where vanity dies. Julian looked around the terrace as if searching for the one face that would confirm he still controlled the narrative. He found none quickly enough. The investors were alert now. The older guests had straightened with that cold interest moneyed people reserve for mismanagement. The bridesmaids were whispering without bothering to hide it. Isabel had gone very still beside him, which Lena suspected was more dangerous than tears. Bennett held the folder at his side and waited. Staff did what well-trained staff always do at the edge of scandal, they became invisible while missing nothing. Julian tried again, softer, for reasonableness. Lena, whatever issue there is, we can resolve it privately. You have no need to turn this into a spectacle. She almost smiled. He had always accused other people of making spectacles out of the flames he lit himself. You invited 200 people to a house you do not control, Lena said. You staged a ceremony under terms you did not have authority to approve. If there is a spectacle here, Julian, it began before I arrived. Isabel's father stepped forward at last, protective anger finally outrunning confusion. What exactly are you saying? Can this wedding proceed or not? Lena answered him because he had at least earned directness. As of this morning I hold legal operational control of Ashbourne Hall. Several aspects of this event violate conditions that required my explicit approval, which was never sought. There are also unpaid obligations tied to venue use and apparent representations made to third parties regarding future partnership rights. Representations, one of the investors repeated. The man was named Peter Hallam, if Lena remembered correctly. He ran a hospitality fund with aggressive press instincts and a talent for laughing while closing people into disadvantageous terms. Julian had admired him for years. Hallam rose from his seat. Julian told us the estate collaboration would be announced tonight. Julian turned. Peter, this is not. Did he tell you that because he believed it? Lena asked, or because he thought no one would check before the champagne was poured? There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere to the left. Isabel finally stepped away from Julian by half a pace. Not much, but enough. You told investors there was a collaboration, she said to him. Julian's restraint frayed. I told them we were in advanced discussions. With whom? Isabel asked. He didn't answer. He looked at Lena instead, as if fury could substitute for missing documentation. Lena felt something almost peaceful settle inside her. Not joy. Certainly not pity. It was the relief of watching a truth emerge without having to drag it by the throat. Bennett handed her the folder. Inside were copies of emails, event amendments, and a proposed press note titled Ashbourne Legacy Partnership to be distributed after dinner. Lena skimmed the page once. Her own family estate name sat in elegant serif above language about curated expansion, strategic heritage monetization, and exclusive destination acquisitions under the Mercer brand. He had written the future in her family's name without asking. Her hand tightened on the paper. That was the moment the last softness left. Isabel read her face before she saw the document. Let me see that. Lena gave it to her. Isabel scanned the page. Color drained from her features with professional efficiency, as if even shock in her had good posture. This was going out tonight, she said. If everything ran on time, Lena replied. You said the estate side was handled. Julian's voice sharpened. It was almost handled. Isabel laughed once, but there was no brightness in it now. Almost handled. Is that what we're calling fraud between vows? That's a ridiculous word, Julian snapped. Is it? Peter Hallam said. The room tilted further away from him. Lena could feel it happening in the tiny shifts, one guest looking down, another taking out a phone, a planner whispering to staff, a bridesmaid removing her smile like jewelry after a bad comment. Public opinion did not have to shout to wound. Sometimes it simply changed direction. Julian looked at Lena with naked contempt now. This is what you came for. To embarrass me. No, she said. I came because the venue manager called me when your assumptions started costing other people money. That landed harder than the legal language. Not because it was clever, but because it was true and ordinary. Julian had always counted on reality sounding less glamorous than his intentions. Isabel held the press note in one hand and lifted the edge of her gown with the other, as if suddenly the dress itself had become cumbersome. Did you ever intend to tell me the hall wasn't yours to negotiate? I intended to finalize it. That is not an answer. He stepped toward her. Isabel, please, not like this. She gave him a stare Lena would remember for years. Not like this. You mean in front of the people whose names you probably already attached to something else? The officiant removed his glasses and polished them with a napkin, which under the circumstances felt almost heroic. Lena glanced at Bennett. He understood. Without a word he signaled to the catering captain, who quietly halted service at the terrace entrance. No champagne. No canapes. No softening of the air with luxury. Let the truth arrive unbuttered. Julian drew a breath and looked again to the guests, attempting salvage. Everyone, there has been a misunderstanding about timing and estate paperwork. Naturally we will pause and address it with counsel. I appreciate your grace. The word grace nearly made Lena laugh. He spoke like a man expecting applause for not drowning on land. Then the Baroness rose. I am 82 years old, she said in a carrying voice, and I have attended exactly 3 weddings that halted mid-vow. In 2 of them the groom had lied about money, and in 1 he had lied about being married already. I advise all of you not to sit back down until someone uses nouns instead of euphemisms. A stunned beat followed. Then, shockingly, a low rustle of agreement. Hallam folded his arms. I would also like nouns. Bennett looked at Lena. This, more than the keys, felt like the real handover. Not legal control. Moral choice. She could cancel everything right then. Order the guests out. Shut the gates and call solicitors. But there was still one thing she needed, not for herself, but because lies multiplied when their witnesses remained uncertain. She turned to Julian. Did you at any point tell Miss Lennox that Ashbourne Hall belonged to my family trust and that access beyond standard hire conditions required my written authorization? Julian said nothing. Did you tell your investors that there was no executed estate partnership? His silence lasted a second too long again. Hallam swore under his breath. Lena faced the guests. Then let me be clear. There is no partnership. There never was. There is a wedding booking made under partial authorization, with additional rights assumed but not granted, and there are commercial representations attached to the Ashbourne name that did not come from me, my trustees, or my counsel. At present, the ceremony cannot continue until those matters are resolved. Cannot, the officiant repeated, with visible relief at finally having a word. Isabel slowly removed her engagement ring and stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. Julian's voice dropped low and venomous. You are enjoying this. Lena looked at him. The strange thing was, she wasn't. Not in the crude way he meant. She had imagined revenge before, late at night in the apartment when the city sounded like distant machinery and her chest felt full of rust. She had imagined him ashamed, diminished, publicly stripped of charm. But reality never arrived as clean satisfaction. It arrived as recognition. No, she said. I'm ending what you started. Once the first layer of performance falls away, people reveal their truest habits with humiliating speed. Some reach for anger because it is cheaper than accountability. Some reach for tears because they still believe sorrow can distract from consequence. Some, the smartest ones, go silent and begin calculating their exits. Isabel was smart. She slipped the ring back on, not as acceptance but as storage, and handed the press note to her maid of honor. Then she faced Lena with a steadiness that altered the temperature of the terrace. What would make this legally compliant, she asked. Julian stared at her. Isabel. No, she said without looking at him. Since apparently I'm the last person to have been briefed, I would love to know the terms of my own wedding disaster. Lena respected the question. It was practical, unsentimental, and just desperate enough to be honest. The standard ceremony could proceed, she said, if all restricted use features are removed, if the after party is cancelled, if no partnership statements are made tonight or in future materials, and if the outstanding vendor balances are guaranteed before dinner service begins. Fireworks are not happening. The Cliff Pavilion is closed. The chapel remains off limits. And any use of the estate name beyond location reference requires council review. Isabel listened without blinking. How much are the unpaid balances? Bennett supplied the figure. 28,460. Several guests inhaled. It was not a ruinous number for the crowd assembled, which somehow made it worse. Julian had gambled prestige over a sum he could easily have covered if he had respected process. Vanity often defaulted on principle long before it defaulted on cash. Isabel turned at last to him. You didn't pay the vendors. They were to be settled from tonight's commitments. Tonight's commitments, she repeated. You mean investor money you did not yet have? It's bridge liquidity, Julian snapped, and immediately looked as though he wished the words back. Hallam laughed outright. Bridge liquidity at a wedding. Jesus Christ. The bridesmaids exchanged horrified looks. Isabel closed her eyes briefly, then opened them as a different woman. Not softer. Colder. Did you use our wedding to pitch your fund? She asked. It's not that simple. That's a yes. He lowered his voice. Isabel, I am trying to prevent a public unraveling. You should have tried that before inviting the public. Lena almost felt sorry for him then, because Julian's deepest talent had always depended on being the smoothest person in the room, and now the room had changed categories. He was no longer speaking to people who wanted to admire him. He was speaking to people who wanted defensible details. Bennett leaned toward Lena. "Miss Hart, several staff members are asking whether to continue the reception setup." She looked out over the terrace. Beyond the guests, the bay had darkened to pewter. The lantern glass along the path caught the first hints of evening. Ashbourne Hall seemed to be waiting, not impatiently, but with the endurance of a place that had seen scandals before and outlasted them all. "Continue dinner prep," Lena said. "Delay service 10 minutes. "Very good." Julian heard and stepped closer. "You cannot possibly intend to host this after what you've done." Lena met his gaze. "I haven't decided whether I am hosting anything. But I will not punish your caterers for your arrogance." The word struck more cleanly than anger would have. He had always despised being revealed through logistics. Isabel straightened her shoulders. "I need 5 minutes alone," she said. Her father moved immediately to her side. She shook her head. "No. Alone." The maid of honor followed her into the house anyway after a quick, fierce glance at Julian that managed to express female solidarity and social horror at once. The guests remained half-seated, half-standing, caught between etiquette and appetite for collapse. Hallam was already on his phone. The Baroness had accepted a folding fan from a footman and was using it like a judge's gavel against boredom. The officiant asked Bennett, in a whisper somehow audible to everyone nearby, whether his fee remained collectible. Julian turned on Lena the moment Isabel disappeared. "This ends now." "It already did," she said. 3 months ago in a solicitor's office, remember? You were weaponizing family paperwork because you couldn't bear being left." Lena let the insult pass through her. Men like Julian always reached for the oldest explanation when confronted by a woman they no longer controlled. He could not imagine competence without emotional contamination because he had built his power by blurring the two in everyone else. "No," she said. "I'm enforcing ownership because you could not bear hearing no." He stepped closer. There was danger in him now, not physical exactly, but the more polished violence of a man whose image was splitting under strain. "You think those keys make you important?" She lifted the ring of iron slightly. "No. They make me responsible." "You never learned the difference." For an instant he had nothing. That used to happen rarely in marriage, usually late at night after she'd solved a problem he had publicly minimized all day. He would look at her as if glimpsing a foreign country he once assumed belonged to his map. Hallam approached, tucking away his phone. "Julian, I need to know whether Mercer Holdings has used any other non-finalized estate associations in its prospect materials." "Not now, Peter." "Exactly now," Hallam said. A second investor joined him, a woman named Renee Alcott whom Lena vaguely remembered from a benefit dinner. "If there are exposure issues tied to false affiliation, counsel needs that answer before any of us walk into dinner under the impression we're endorsing something." Julian's smile returned in fragments, the way a damaged machine tries to restart. "Renee, Peter, let's not catastrophize." There was every expectation these matters would be finalized. "Expectation is not authorization," Alcott said. Lena almost thanked her. At the top of the terrace steps, Isabel reappeared without the veil. The visual shock of it moved through the guests before she said a word. Without the veil she looked less like a bride and more like herself, which was to say sharper, older, and suddenly impossible to patronize. She descended the steps slowly, her father 2 paces behind. "I have a question," she said to Lena. "Go ahead." "If I write the vendor guarantee myself, remove the unapproved features, and proceed with a private dinner instead of a public announcement, would you permit the legal portion of the ceremony to continue?" Julian stared at her as if she had betrayed him by adapting. Lena considered. The answer mattered beyond spectacle now. It was about the house, the staff, the precedent, and the strange line between justice and vengeance. She could refuse and nobody would blame her. But refusal would make this about her pain. Permission, under her terms, would make it about his fraud. "Yes," she said. If the guarantees clear immediately. If the guest list shrinks to family and existing invitees only, no press. If every branded estate mention is surrendered tonight. And if Bennett oversees all changes. Isabel nodded once. Done. Julian actually laughed, incredulous. You are not taking instructions from her at our wedding. Our wedding, Isabel repeated. That's an ambitious phrase for a man who financed his vows with bridge liquidity. A sound close to a choke escaped one of the groomsmen. Lena looked away for a moment toward the sea because if she did not, she might finally smile. Then Isabel took off the engagement ring again, this time for good, and placed it in Julian's hand. Actually, she said, I think we're done here. There are silences that feel empty, and there are silences that arrive so dense with meaning they seem to alter the air pressure in a room. The one that followed Isabel's sentence belonged to the second kind. Julian stared at the ring in his palm as if it had become an accusation heavier than metal should allow. The guests did not gasp this time. They understood instinctively that noise would cheapen what had just happened. Even scandal, at a certain level of money and pride, prefers the texture of velvet over broken glass. Isabel held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she turned not to the guests, not to her father, but to Bennett. Please have someone bring my things to the blue car, she said. Also, I will settle the vendor balances personally before I leave. Those people worked. They shouldn't pay for his vanity. Bennett gave a slight bow. Of course, Miss Lennox. The correction was elegant. Not bride. Not future Mrs. Mercer. Miss Lennox. Woman restored to herself in a single formal syllable. Julian found his voice. You are overreacting. Isabel laughed softly and with such total absence of delight that several people looked away. That phrase alone should disqualify men from marriage. Her father descended the last step and stood beside her. He did not touch her. Pride sometimes expresses itself best through proximity rather than comfort. He faced Julian with an expression that suggested 3 generations of impeccable manners were all that prevented immediate destruction. I backed this event because my daughter believed you were building a life, he said. If you have used her, my family name, or this estate as props for one of your leveraged fantasies, we are finished with you entirely. Julian lifted both hands in frustration. This is absurd. The paperwork was delayed. That's all. Renee Alcott stepped closer. No, Mr. Mercer. Delayed paperwork is when a courier misses a signature packet. This appears to be fabricated certainty sold as fact. Hallam added, to donors, no less. Someone at the back muttered, and on his wedding day, which in another context would have been comic. Lena remained still through all of it, the keys cool in her hand. She understood with a clarity that surprised her that the wedding itself no longer mattered. It had ceased to be the event. The event was exposure, and exposure was already complete. What remained was aftermath management, which had always been her skill. Long before she knew Julian was capable of such layered arrogance, she had been the person who noticed where pressure gathered. Which beams took weight? Which contracts hid assumptions in appendix language? Which charming men confused possibility with permission? Bennett murmured, shall I clear the terrace? Not yet, Lena said. He waited. There are people who came a long way, she said. And there are staff who prepared a full service. We can repurpose dinner in the main hall as a standard house supper for those who wish to stay, provided everyone understands the ceremony is cancelled and the estate bears no connection to any commercial announcement. Bennett's eyes warmed almost imperceptibly. Your grandmother would have approved. Julian whipped toward her. You are not turning my wedding into one of your heritage hospitality experiments. Your wedding is over, Lena said. The words landed so cleanly the wind seemed to stop around them. For a moment he looked young. Not innocent. Merely young in the embarrassing sense, a man stripped of the story that made him feel advanced. Lena had seen him like that once before, years ago, after a board member challenged his projections and he came home furious that competence in others felt like sabotage to him. She had spent half the night calming him then. She would not do it now. He stepped nearer and lowered his voice. You wanted this. Ever since the divorce you've been waiting for one opportunity to make me look small. Lena answered just as quietly. No, Julian. I spent the first month after the divorce trying to remember how quiet my own apartment sounded. The second month learning which parts of my life were actually mine. I didn't come hunting your downfall. You brought it to my family's front door with place cards. His face twisted. You always did this. Made yourself sound noble while punishing everyone around you with your principles. Noble, she said. That's rich coming from a man who borrowed an estate he couldn't name properly and wrapped fraud in white roses. The groomsmen had drifted away by then, not out of loyalty to anyone else, but out of self-preservation. Nothing empties male camaraderie faster than imminent reputational risk. At the edge of the terrace, the Baroness approached Lena with her fan closed like a small baton. My dear, she said, I hope you understand that if you do decide to serve dinner, I plan to stay. One should never waste a properly prepared soul because a man confuses narrative with entitlement. Lena blinked, then laughed despite herself. You are welcome to stay. Splendid. The Baroness glanced at the keys. Your grandmother once told me houses test people by waiting until they think no one is watching. Apparently she was right. She glided away before Lena could answer. Hallam and Alcott were speaking in low tones with their respective counsel by phone. Isabel had disappeared into the house to remove the gown's train, according to a whispered report that drifted from two guests near the aisle. Her father was on a call of his own, likely instructing someone to undo a month of public assumptions in under an hour. The officiant had finally sat down and accepted sparkling water with the gratitude of a man reprieved from performing a legally dubious sacrament. Bennett touched Lena's elbow. There is another matter. She turned. He handed her a small envelope, cream and unmarked. This was found in the estate office safe among the delayed transfer documents. It was addressed to be given to you on the day the keys passed into your hand. Lena stared at it. Her grandmother's handwriting crossed the front in faded brown ink. For Lena, when the house chooses her back. Her breath caught. Not now, Bennett said gently. Later. She nodded and slipped the envelope into her bag because if she opened it on the terrace she would not survive the first line. Julian noticed. What is that? None of your business, Lena said. That, more than anything, seemed finally to teach him he was outside the circle. Not excluded from affection. Excluded from relevance. He had spent years assuming her history would always remain available to him, even when he discarded her. That the private rooms of her life would stay unlocked because he once walked through them. But keys change that. So does divorce. So does the moment a woman stops translating herself into terms a selfish man can use. Isabel returned wearing a wool coat over the half-unfastened gown, which made her look abruptly human rather than ceremonial. She carried a phone and a card case. The transfers are done, she told Bennett. Have accounting confirm with the vendors. The florist, the caterer, the quartet, transport, all of them. Bennett checked his device and inclined his head. Confirmed. Good. Isabel looked at Lena. I won't apologize for marrying a liar I did not know was lying. But I will apologize for underestimating you. I thought you were a sentimental residue he hadn't cleaned up. That's clearly not what you are. Lena considered the honesty of that. It was harsh, but then truth often arrived in unpleasant tailoring. Accepted, she said. Isabel nodded once. Then, after a pause, he copied your color palette, didn't he? Among other things. I knew it, Isabel said, half to herself. I thought he suddenly developed taste. This time Lena did smile. Isabel exhaled, shook her head in something between disbelief and rueful self-contempt, and walked past Julian without another glance. He turned as if to follow. Her father stepped into his path. Don't. Julian stopped. A gull cried over the bay. Someone inside the house began moving chairs for dinner. The estate breathed around the wreckage and remained standing. Lena looked at Bennett. "Open the main hall," she said. "No speeches. No branding. Just dinner." "Very good, Miss Hart." "And Bennett?" "Yes. Please remove the white roses from the ceremony arch before service." He understood instantly. Not because they were ugly, but because they had been asked to symbolize the wrong promise. Of course. By 8:15 the Great Hall had been transformed from a failed wedding reception into something stranger and, in its own way, more honest. The long oak tables were reset without the towering floral installations. Candles were lowered. Place cards were removed. The musicians played from the gallery instead of the terrace, choosing standards warm enough to support conversation but not quite generous enough to erase what had happened. Guests who stayed did so because curiosity, appetite, or a sense of historical occasion outweighed embarrassment. That, Lena suspected, was how most social memory was formed. She did not sit at the head of anything. She moved with Bennett through the room, checking staffing, making certain the service team's new gratuities would be covered, confirming that no press statements had been sent, and watching the estate slide back under order as easily as a slipped sheet straightened by practiced hands. Her body had finally begun to register the day. Her shoulders ached. Her face felt too carefully arranged. But beneath the fatigue ran a quieter current she had not felt in years. Certainty. Not about everything. Not about the future, which still looked wide and inconvenient and unscripted. But about herself. About what she could hold without breaking and what she never again intended to excuse. Renee Alcott intercepted her near the fireplace before first course. "For what it's worth," she said, "I admire the way you handled that." Lena almost laughed. "You make it sound as if I was moderating a panel." "In my experience, Ms. Hart, public financial embarrassment and panel moderation have similar survival requirements." Alcott glanced around the room. "Julian has been positioning Mercer Holdings as a heritage luxury access vehicle for months. Attractive narrative. Thin internal discipline. I had questions. And now I have fewer investments to consider." Lena appreciated the frankness. "I wasn't aiming to crater his business." "No," Alcott said. "But he appears to have volunteered it." Across the room, Hallam was already leaving, coat over his arm, expression hard enough to chip marble. Two of Julian's board contacts had vanished before soup. News traveled faster through money than through grief. Julian himself had refused dinner. He remained somewhere in the library with his phone, trying, Lena assumed, to salvage investors, dignity, or both. He would discover eventually that the first lost thing is never the one people notice most. Reputation begins crumbling in private before it makes noise in public. Tonight had given witnesses to what was already unstable. Lena accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter and stepped briefly into the side corridor for air. The house was cooler there. The sounds of dinner softened behind thick stone walls. For a few seconds she let herself lean against the paneling and close her eyes. "You look like someone who has been carrying a cathedral all day," a man's voice said. She opened her eyes and turned. Theo Vale stood a few feet away, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a folded umbrella. He had arrived late, likely from the city. Tall, dark-haired, slightly rain-marked at the shoulders, Theo was the son of the solicitor who had served the Hart family for decades, though Theo himself had become an architect specializing in restoration rather than law. Lena had worked with him on Ashbourne Hall's structural plans years earlier, back when he still argued with craftsmen about mortar composition like it mattered to the moral order of the universe. It probably did, to him. "Theo," she said. "I didn't know you were here. My father sent me when the call started sounding like a Greek tragedy with invoices." He glanced toward the great hall. "I see he did not exaggerate." Lena let out a breath that felt dangerously close to relief. "I think I just hosted my ex-husband's cancelled wedding dinner." "You did it impeccably." That word from him warmed something she had not noticed was cold. He looked at her more closely. Are you all right? Lena considered the question properly because he deserved a proper answer. Strangely, yes. Tired. Angry in delayed installments. But yes. Good. He handed her a small flat box. The locksmith finished the archive room duplicates. Bennett said today might be a symbolic moment to deliver them. She took the box and looked down at it. More keys. New brass, precisely cut. Not ceremonial. Working keys for actual rooms, actual records, actual future decisions. My life has become aggressively metaphorical, she said. Theo smiled. Houses do that when ignored too long. They stood in easy silence for a moment. It struck Lena that she had not had easy silence with a man in years. Julian had always filled quiet with strategy, irritation, or self-justifying analysis. Theo simply occupied it without fear. I heard about the divorce, he said after a beat. I almost called. Then I thought perhaps you deserved at least one person not asking you to narrate it. Thank you for that. And for what it's worth, he added, I never believed his version. Lena looked up. There are so many to choose from. The one where two ambitious adults grew apart gracefully because timing shifted, he said dryly. Men who leave competent women often become poets of inevitability. It saves them from sounding selfish. She laughed, genuinely this time, and felt some internal knot loosen. Bennett appeared in the corridor just long enough to say the fish was being served and several guests had asked whether there would be remarks. Lena instructed him there would not. He nodded, glanced with approval at Theo's presence as if adding him quietly to the category of structurally sound elements, and left again. Theo leaned against the opposite wall. What will you do with the house now? Lena had been asking herself that all evening, though beneath the question lay an older answer. Her grandmother never wanted Ashbourne Hall turned into a dead museum or a vulgar revenue machine. She wanted it lived in, preserved, used with intention. During the marriage Lena had bent that desire toward Julian's commercial ambition because compromise had seemed like adulthood. Now compromise looked suspiciously like erosion. I'm not selling it, she said. Thank God. I'm thinking of reopening it under the trust. Limited events. Residencies in the off-season. Legal and financial recovery programs for women rebuilding after divorce or widowhood. Quiet things. Useful things. Weddings too, perhaps, but only for people who understand the difference between a promise and a production. Theo's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. That sounds exactly like the place it wants to be. She studied him. You make houses sound opinionated. Old ones are. A server came looking for Lena to ask whether the dessert course should proceed despite reduced numbers. She approved it. Lemon tart and poached pears. Her grandmother's menu influence, hidden under contemporary plating. As the server left, Theo said, if you need help reviewing the West Wing before winter, call me. Not out of pity. Out of selfish professional interest. Ashbourne has been mismanaged by people who think beauty is just branding, and I'd enjoy helping correct that. Lena held his gaze a second longer than necessary. I'll call. Good. From the great hall came a soft burst of laughter. Not mocking. Human. The sort that follows wine and relief after disaster has clarified everyone's loyalties. Strange, Lena thought, that the evening might yet become memorable for reasons no one had scripted. She touched the envelope from her grandmother inside her bag and the old iron keys in her palm and knew suddenly that the worst of the day had already happened. Everything else was administration and weather. That realization did not feel triumphant. It felt clean. Dinner ended just after 10. Guests left in clusters, coats drawn close against the sea wind, voices lowered to the intimate register scandal creates among people determined to sound discreet while carrying ammunition for weeks. Some offered Lena sympathy. Some offered admiration. A few, the more perceptive ones, offered nothing except a handshake and a look that acknowledged she had done something difficult without making it theatrical. She valued those most. The Baroness departed last among the elders, kissed Lena's cheek, and said, "Your grandmother would have told you never to marry a man who treats architecture as content. Please remember that." Then she stepped into her car and disappeared into the night as if she existed only to deliver hard truths en couture. The staff moved through the winding down ritual with visible relief. Candles were snuffed. Linen tallied. Glassware counted. Bennett oversaw everything with military gentleness. By the time the final van rolled out and the quartet had packed away their music, Ashbourne Hall felt larger, emptied not of people alone but of the false intention that had occupied it all day. Julian had not reappeared during dinner. Near 11, Bennett informed Lena that he had finally left through the side drive after a loud phone argument in the library and one unsuccessful attempt to gain access to the archive corridor. He asked for the keys, Bennett said. Lena looked at the ring resting on the desk in the estate office. I told him they had already found their rightful hand. She breathed out a laugh. Bennett, I hope you know you're slightly terrifying. I've had practice, he said. When the last staff member signed out, he hesitated at the doorway. Miss Hart, shall I remain on site tonight? No, she said. Go home. You've earned 10 homes. He almost smiled. I have set the alarm schedule and left the east wing lamps on. The house dislikes total darkness after upheaval. Of course it does. He inclined his head. Good night, Miss Hart. Good night, Bennett. And thank you for calling me. He looked at her with the same grave kindness he had worn all day. There are times when a house needs its rightful witness. Tonight seemed one of them. After he left, silence gathered in layers. Not empty silence. Lived-in silence. The hall clock spoke once every 60 seconds. Wind pressed softly against old glass. Somewhere in the kitchen a pipe clicked, then settled. Lena carried the keys, Theo's duplicate set, and her grandmother's envelope into the morning room. Only then did she finally take off her shoes. She sat in the window seat where the bay lay black beyond the pane, moonlight breaking across it in torn silver ribbons, and opened the envelope carefully along the seam. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. My darling Lena. If these keys come to you after loss, do not mistake that for cruelty. Some inheritances arrive only when the wrong hands have proved why they cannot keep them. You were never meant to guard this house for a man who wanted applause more than foundation. You were meant to belong to yourself first, and then, if you chose, to someone who understands that care is not a performance but a practice. Ashbourne does not need conquering. It needs tending. So do you. If a day comes when someone tries to make you feel small within these walls, put the keys in your own hand and remember that doors obey the person who owns the threshold. Love, Grandmother. Lena read it twice, then pressed the paper to her mouth because grief and gratitude had always shared a border in her body and she no longer had energy to separate them. She cried then, but only for a few minutes. Not because Julian was gone. That grief had burned through months ago, leaving mainly ash and insult. She cried because her grandmother had known. Because somewhere in all the legal delay and silence there had been faith waiting for her. Because the house had chosen her back, exactly as the envelope promised. When the tears passed, she folded the letter and slipped it into her bag. Then she stood, crossed the room, and opened the French doors to the terrace. Cold salt air rushed in. The ceremony arch had been dismantled. The white roses were gone. Lanterns along the path glowed low, no longer decorative, simply useful. The sea kept breathing against the shore as it had before vows, before divorce, before any of this. Lena stepped outside barefoot, the stone chilled under her feet. A figure moved at the edge of the terrace below. Theo, coat over one arm, looking up as if he had guessed she might need one more witness before the night ended. I was about to leave, he called softly. Then I saw the light. She came down 2 steps, keyring cool against her palm. I thought you had. I did. Then I came back. Architects are bad at leaving unfinished structures. She smiled. That sounds suspiciously like a line. It probably is. He came up the steps, stopping at a distance that respected both the hour and the day she'd had. I wanted to make sure you weren't alone if you didn't want to be. For the first time that day, Lena answered without strategy. I don't think I want to be alone tonight. I just also don't want anything from it. Theo's expression gentled. Then let's want nothing. It's underrated. She laughed quietly. The sound floated out over the dark lawn. He looked toward the bay. It's a clear tide. Tomorrow the water will be high by 6. The lower garden path may flood. Tomorrow, she repeated, and the word felt unexpected and kind. Yes, Theo said. Conveniently, there seems to be one. She turned the keys once around her finger. All day they had felt like proof. Now they felt like permission. Would you walk the grounds with me? She asked. I'd like that. So they did. Not as a beginning dressed up to impress itself. Not as an ending pretending to be wise. Simply as two people moving through cold night air while the house behind them stood restored to truth. They crossed the south lawn where chairs had stood hours earlier and paused by the rosemary beds silvered under moonlight. Lena showed him where she wanted to reopen the conservatory reading room. He pointed out stress lines in the old paving and promised to send a mason he trusted. They discussed roof drainage, winter planting, and the possibility of turning the West Cottage into short-stay accommodation for women attending trust programs. Practical things. Hopeful things. Things with beams and budgets instead of vows. At the cliff edge they stopped. Below, the waves struck rock with patient force. Julian had once told Lena that love meant being chosen. Standing there with iron keys in one pocket, brass keys in the other, and the future no longer arranged by someone else's appetite, she finally understood how small that definition had always been. Love, the real kind, might begin there sometimes. But life did not. Life began the moment she stopped asking abandoned doors to open and recognized the house in front of her had always been waiting for her hand. She turned back toward Ashbourne Hall, lights burning warm through old glass, and for the first time in years, the sight of home did not feel like something she might lose.